This is a clip on the 4 quadrants from Mike Kottmeyer's webinar series, Preparing for Agile Transformation.
You have a couple of different states that you can be in, okay? And so sometimes you are in this quadrant for legitimate business reasons, right? Needs to be stable, needs to be predictable, can never be wrong by a penny, right? All kinds of different things, right? Total, has to be resilient, all kinds of different things. Then sometimes, right, you're stuck in this quadrant. So I'm going to call this business need, right? And sometimes you're stuck in this quadrant because of what I'm just going to say is dependencies, right? Impediments, dependencies, right? And so we might want to be in this quadrant, but the nature of the organizational design, the way that work is approved, the way that the technology is built, okay, will not allow the application of lean startup or even agile methodologies kind of in their base state. But inevitably what you end up here is networks of teams, right? Because you want to build teams, right? Because we know we can't really do Scrum effectively without teams. But we basically acknowledge that there's dependencies between those teams. So we have to have a way of coordinating dependencies and planning forward, right? And so there ends up being some sort of coordination layer. And then there's usually some sort of longer term portfolio management here, right? And so when I'm down in this left quadrant, I want to be as agile as I can possibly be. I want to use lean as much as I can. So this ends up looking a lot like for us a lot of times is Scrum, Kanban-based feeder systems, Kanban-based portfolio management, right? And and is it safe? Are we talking about safe? Like, yeah, maybe, right? So if you guys aren't familiar with my position on safe, like I think most of the agile methodologies, especially the scaled methodologies, rely heavily on the same core reference architectures, like teams at the bottom, some sort of coordinating mechanism that rides on top of the team, some sort of governance framework, right? There's a reference architecture. And then what SAFe came along and did is it instantiated that reference architecture with what we call a reference implementation. So I would say that SAFe is a reference implementation of some core reference architectural type principles. Same with LESS, same with disciplined agile delivery. Nexus is a little bit of a different beast, right? But whatever, right? So most of the stuff that are out there is based upon the same core stuff. Totally supportive of the same core stuff. What you have to decide is the actual implementation of that reference architecture applicable into your domain? And one of the things that we see a challenge with is that somebody says, okay, well, I'm doing Agile at scale and I have all this complexity, this business need, these dependencies, right? All this kind of different stuff. So I'm going to do SAFe. And that's cool, right? But the reality is that sometimes SAFe is actually, and you guys are gonna laugh at me, but it's actually too light for that context, right? And so like you could do SAFe probably at this point, as long as you had really good Scrum underneath it. I would probably do Kanban-based feeder systems and queuing systems in preparation for release planning. But in practice, what I see, and I don't know exactly what the dogma inside of SAFe is, but what I see is that people going like PI to PI to PI to PI with kind of blinders on. And what I think has to happen is that the portfolio level planning has to be somewhere around 12 to 18 months out. The release planning, the PI planning has to do at least a PI look ahead. I'm a big fan, especially in these kinds of ecosystems, of continuously iterating the backlog and emerging the backlog even while the PI is going. We're continuously getting ready for the next PI. And then really, really solid Scrum and really high-end dependency management and front-loading of dependencies and a release, right? All this kind of stuff, right? So you might say, like would call like stuff in this quadrant, if you were using SAFe and you were trying to figure out like, okay, we've made this investment in SAFe, what do we do? I call it SAFe Plus, right? It's like SAFe is good, it's insufficient, it doesn't provide enough forward planning, because in the presence of dependencies, in the presence of a roadmap and need for stable backlog and all this kind of stuff, SAFe is actually insufficient, right? You guys can hate me for saying that, but it's true. And then up here, right, we've got, if we're going to be up here, we have small teams, right? A lot of times even up here, it's not even working off of a really clear like backlog like we think of in Scrum, like user stories or backlog items sitting in Jira or something like that. The way I work with my software team is that Donald, who's our lead engineer, he has kind of like themes. Right? He has like, okay, these are the top 3 themes. And he has a team of like 4 people, I think 3 permanent people, or him, 2 permanent people and an intern. And they just work together. They work on the themes. They provide a drop of the software every couple of days, up to every 10 days. And so they're absolutely iterative and incremental. They use best practices, continuous integration. They have the ability to continuously deploy. I'm telling you, I don't think he's ever broken anything in like the 5 years that he's worked here. Maybe some people that use it. Like we've had some OAuth issues and things like that. But for the most part, right, we operate squarely lean startup, right? I don't really care to see his backlog. I want to know his roadmap. I want to know themes he's working on. And then him and his team work together and they just produce a working tested increment of software. And as long as it's solving the problems for my consultants and as long as it's solving the problems for my customers, right, it doesn't really matter, right? We're not making and meeting commitments. Where that could change and where it might change is as we bring our Navigator, that's what the product's called that he works on. He actually works on a couple products, but the product I have in mind is Navigator. As that actually becomes more of a thing, you could actually see a lean startup project moving into more of an agile, traditional agile project where you have like quarterly roadmap, right? You have some high level idea of where you want to go, right? And then you got more detailed quarterly release plans and then some really, specific kind of sprint planning going on underneath. But we're not there yet, right? So we're still kind of figuring out where this product kind of fits in our market. But when you can create the conditions for this, right? And, we have a business model. I'm the investor in the product. I'm its primary stakeholder. We're actually inventing things that our customers don't even know they need, or inventing tools that our consultants don't even know they need, right? So I'm driving it with my money. I'm making a strategic investment. I actually don't care right now what the ROI on it is because the internal ROI is enough, right? I have created the conditions where this can happen as a lean startup, right? It's totally cool. Like I said, when we have customers, we might need to move it out of that and into a more structured, disciplined kind of agile model. So you create the conditions, right? So the conditions here, right, are what we've been talking about for the last couple weeks, right? Encapsulated teams, minimal dependencies, groups that can collaborate in sprint planning. They don't require a ton of orchestration, right? They don't need a ton of portfolio management. They're really connected to the customer. They're operating off of well-defined backlogs, feeding those backlogs in, producing a working tested increment of software every sprint, right? But they're way more structured because this roadmap in this world matters and the ability to make a release commitment matters. Can't be totally ad hoc. And then the delivery of sprints matters, right? And so when we first did the Why Agile Fails talk, I guess, Tim, what was that, man? Was that probably 8 years ago, 7 years ago that we dropped that in market? You happen to remember? Yeah. What's the views? I mean, that thing's gotten a lot of views. People Google Why Agile Fails all the time. I think it's fascinating. The number of people that are interested in Why Agile's failing, that tells you something about kind of our market. And so the basic hypothesis of that talk, and I think we're better at telling the story now than we were then, but the fundamental idea of that talk is that most people are operating in this kind of chaotic environment. Ecosystem, right? They're operating in this chaotic ecosystem. And what they do, right, which is interesting, is they run an experiment. They either do it here. In the talk, I actually talk about them doing it here, right? And what would a successful pilot look like in that kind of an ecosystem, right? Well, you'd give it, go figure, right? A team of 6 to 8 people. right? You'd give it a greenfield kind of project, something that we're trying to figure out. It probably doesn't have any dependencies with it and anything else. We've lessened the governance restrictions on it, right? All that kind of stuff. We've given it a dedicated team, product owner, scrum master, maybe team of people, right? All that kind of stuff. Big problem to solve. And they operate like Donald does, right? For my team, right? And they kill it, right? They're always going to kill it, right? If you do that. And so let's just say they start doing Scrum. I know I'm up in the lean startup quadrant here, but let's say they just start doing Scrum, right? So you have this group of people, right, that start doing Scrum, and we start to believe that it's actually Scrum that is creating the benefit, right? In reality, it was the no dependencies and it was the loosening of the governance and all those different things, right? So we take the Scrum practices and we move them over into this chaotic environment where the right kind of ecosystem doesn't actually exist to be able to maximize the efficacy of those methodology things that you're doing, daily stand-ups and reviews and retrospectives, all that kind of thing, right? And so why Agile fails, right, is we do the pilot and we create the right conditions for it, and then we just lift the practices over into this poor ecosystem, and we fail, right? So in my early iteration of this is I basically said there's like a wall right here, right? You can't go through this wall if you're in chaos and you want to go to Agile or Lean Startup, right? So kind of the fundamental hypothesis is that you had to go around. Okay, but that was the idea. And just kind of as an interesting aside, there's a consultant that works with us, writes a blog called Tyner Blaine. His name's Scott Selhorst. And Scott's like one of my favorite people in the whole world. And brilliant product guy. And he wrote a post about really, in effect, the same thing, but from the lens of product management. And I'm a big believer that when you start to see multiple people come to the same conclusion from a totally different angle, that you've discovered some sort of truth. And so I had a bit of a kind of like a blogger to blogger relationship with Scott, right? We knew who each other were and we had interacted with each other's posts. But I reached out to him, and ultimately after about a year of chit chat, and we ended up talking on the phone, met him. He lives out in Austin. Met him out in Austin. We compared notes, and then we started hunting down ways of working together for a long time after that. But what he's done with us over the last couple of years, which is pretty cool, is pulled his product craft into our overall transformation story. And it's a really powerful thing to see, but I think there's some truth here. But in that initial conversation, one of the things he challenged was this idea that you couldn't hop the line, right? And so I maintain that if you're actually going to transform, that you have to go around, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like, and then I think we'll be at a good breaking point for today. But if you are in a chaotic system and you have something that you need to get done in an agile way, by all means, right, go spin up a team, give it autonomy over its technology stack, put in really solid technical and engineering practices, CI/CD pipelines, DevOps, right? All that different stuff, right? Give it a really good product owner that has authority and autonomy to decide what goes in that backlog, get in front of customers, iteratively and increment and build the product, right? You can do that. Clearly you can do that, right? And that's actually what we're starting to see with some of the large organizations that we're in that tend to work with big consultancies. And we work with side by side with a lot of those big consultancies, and a lot of the strategy appears to be, obviously I'm not on the inside of any of this, but a lot of the strategy appears to be is leave the chaos where it is. Or maybe at best it's down here, right, in this quadrant, but then build these kinds of teams, right? That isn't super difficult to do, right? To go build a farm of teams that are solving really unique problems that just natively lend themselves to Agile. But I don't think that's transformation, right? Because the backside of this, right, this part of the organization or this part of the organization, like how do you get it to move, right? Because at a minimum, there is going to be some piece of this mode 1 organization that's going to have to at least get to smaller batch sizes and create some optionality, break some dependencies so that pieces of it can start to deliver faster. Because that problem that I was talking about a little bit earlier that I said I would come back to is that most non-trivial organizations are actually building systems of systems, right? And there's going to be some part of the system that is inevitably going to need to stay here. There is some part of the system that is going to have to be lean startup and totally inspect and adapt. But here's going to be your challenge is in the early stages of this, these guys are going to learn that they need to build something that their back end is not capable of building fast. And so there's going to be a set of capabilities, a set of, and I'm going to say business capabilities. You could say there's going to be a set of value streams or a set of APIs or functions or whatever. They're going to have to be carved out of this ecosystem, and they're going to have to be moved over into this ecosystem, right? You're going to have to create the conditions where this can be technically decoupled and can operate with autonomy, can be funded separately, right? There's a whole lot of different things that go around this, right? And so while you can do this, to Scott's point, it doesn't actually make the rest of the organization any better. And so a lot of times, like what we see is to fund a transformation is that this lower left quadrant group gets arbitrarily cut. We're going to take 20% out of it, and we're going to use it to go fund this new stuff. But then it actually weakens this group in the lower left because they don't have the resources to even perform at the level that they were performing in the past. And so what our general strategy is as we start to think about this stuff is go build your stuff in the upper right quadrant, right? But it's going to have to interface with the lower left quadrant. And it's going to do it. We're going to try to get the lower left quadrant operating as iteratively and incrementally and as stably as we can, operating in smaller batches to the best of our ability. But usually that involves heavy requirements analysis, dependency management, rolling wave planning, progressive elaboration, right? There's a lot of stuff that it takes to solidify an agile operating model in this quadrant. It's absolutely necessary. Initially, it's more expensive, but then you can start to deprecate some of that control.
Thanks for watching. To learn more about upcoming content and events, visit leadingagile.com/events.